thanks for joining us for this session. We talk about open source software, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and the ISO 18974. But perhaps to start and to get to know the crowd a little bit, could you please raise your hand? Who is from a company, from a financial institute company? Okay, and the rest are from third-party providers, is that correct? Can you also raise your hand a little? Okay. And everyone has heard of DORA so far? Or who hasn't heard of DORA? Okay. So let's see what we can present to you today. First, let me introduce Katharina.
Yeah, I'm Katharina. I'm from PwC Germany. I'm working there as a manager for open source topics and also with regards to DORA, as this is a very important part of this regulation. And I'm specialized in anything around governance, processes, policies, and yeah, we'll provide you some deep dive today into DORA and open source.
Perfect. So yeah, my name is Marcel. I'm head of our open source software services from PwC Germany. And what we do is we help companies to enable the digital future and reduce risk with open source. Yeah? And we always talk about three service pillars we have. It's from consulting and implementation of open source software practices, enablement, yeah, and audit and certification. That's where the ISO 18974 comes in, for example, and also managed service in terms of very operational stuff. So altogether, we have a large open source software practices and help organizations. And over the last years, more and more regulation came up, for example, DORA, and that's what we are here to talk about today. So first of all, we want to give you a little insight, why is supply chain security relevant? What are the latest statistics and numbers? Yeah? And then Katharina will dive into the DORA and the regulation, also give you some practical or some information about the actual act. Yeah? And then we show what 18974, the ISO standard, can help you with. So I guess many people here are deep involved in open source software practices and open source software development, etc. So, but still, we have these figures here from various statistics and surveys, and you get the PowerPoint presentation later on. I mean, you can still take this back when you have some internal discussions in your company, when you talk about budgets and funding and so on, and why all this stuff needs to be done. I think these figures are always good to have and are impressive. So I mean, as we all know, software, open source software is actually in every software stack relevant and is in each and every code base. Statistics says 97% of code bases have open source software included. And the latest survey in Germany from the Bitkom, it's a digital association of all the digital industries in Germany, says that 2/3 of IT providers for the financial sector in Germany don't check their open source security risks with tooling. So they somehow do this manually. However, this can work. I mean, it's not quite clear to me how you can manually check for open source security risks in nowadays software stacks. Yeah, so our impression is, or our feelings is, needs to be done with tooling, etc. I mean, we are discussing this for 10 years, and but still, the survey says 2/3 don't do it with tooling. So, and this brings quite some risk to the overall supply chain. And therefore it's relevant, and that's actually also where DORA comes in. That's where it's relevant to manage the risks from third parties. Yeah. And here at the bottom we have some other figures like 84% of code bases contain at least one open source vulnerability. I mean, of course, this needs to be checked in detail. Is this vulnerability relevant for this particular software stack and for this functionality? So it might be a vulnerability in the code which is not relevant and therefore not critical. But also, I mean, this needs to be managed and needs to be taken care of. Yeah. And 1 year after Log4j, after it was public, the whole issues about Log4j. It was measured that still 40% of downloads from Log4j was the vulnerable version. So also, I mean, still 1 year later, after all this buzz and everyone was talking about, still companies and developers and so on were downloading the vulnerable code packages. Other statistics say that, like, in the next year, in 2025, we have like 45% more supply chain attacks in terms of security issues. So the number of supply chain attacks are increasing, and 245,000 malicious packages are available or were available in 2023 to download. So just these figures to keep in mind and to have in your hand when you discuss the measures that need to be taken. Let's make another question here. Does everyone know xzutils and Log4j, or who doesn't know these 4 very common or very popular cases of security leaks? Okay, so you're all well aware. That's good. so I don't need to talk you through. You get these for later on. But again, just a few months back, this xzutils shows how much effort nowadays is performed to get into the systems, to somehow break the systems, and how much time is invested. Over 2 years, it's said, was invested to actually place this developer in the community for this particular project and so on. Luckily, it was detected very, very quickly, and not so much has happened as far as we know. But still, it just shows again very professional acts are done nowadays. Yeah? And in many conversations, we then have the topic where it says, okay, then go back to closed source and don't use so much open source. Just last week, actually, I was talking to a bank, German bank with a Polish branch, and they said, okay, they have the policy to use as little open source as possible because of security issues and issues that they don't have enough service and so on around open source. I think, or we think in our practice, that this is not the solution. Yeah, I mean, open source needs to be managed, and you cannot not use open source. And closed source is not more secure, not particularly more secure, particularly when open source is included in closed source software. So therefore, I think we also need to be attentive, and that with all these of publicly known issues about and vulnerabilities in open source code, that people don't have the impression that open source is much less secure. Yeah? So that's something which needs to be handled as well. So, given the relevance of open source software and given the security and vulnerability cases that have been public in the last years, also legislations and regulators have taken action. And just to name here some quite relevant things is, for example, the US executive order. You may have heard of it. It's a little bit older. It's from 2021, where it says that an SBOM needs to be provided with each and every product, so that security can be checked and can be traced back which components are used. Today we talk about DORA just after this slide. So DORA as well picks up, I mean, it's a Digital Operational Resilience Act. The finance institutes in Europe, of course, have to take measures, of course, have to install a program to take care of DORA and the new regulation and the new requirements. But it's interesting that in DORA, particular open source software analysis are also mentioned, and later on we see some more hints and some more information where it says that open source needs to be taken care of as well. So they particularly point out this topic as well. And the cyber resilience Act, which will be enforced very soon as well. Same topic, yes. Also in this EU Cyber Resilience Act, they talk about due diligence of components from third parties and free and open source software components. So just to show that in latest regulation, they particularly stress the topic of security of open source software, which comes through supply chains, etc., into your organizations. And what has been done from the industry, yeah, and what can help are the ISOs, which are from the Linux Foundation Open Chain project, initiated and developed with many companies over the world. The ISO 5230, which takes care or which addresses the topic of open source license compliance. And a little bit more new is the 2023 ISO 18974 on managing open source security aspects. So, and having this said, I hand over to Katharina to dive into the DORA Act.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcel. So I think it's too loud, is it?
No, it's good.
No? Okay. Sounds so loud to me. As we have seen, the number of critical security incidents and also the increasing trend of supply chain attacks requires more action from our regulators, and this is what the European Union has done with DORA. I think this is also somehow the first very concrete international act addressing this topic. We think that other countries or other unions will do so as well. We can also see it on an international level that others are also trying to develop equal regulations. As it comes from the European Commission, DORA applies to all financial institutes operating within the European Union. However, what is quite interesting here, that also others may be affected. So on the one side, all other financial institutions or insurance companies who are providing services within the European Union, and we will dive into that later, also IT third-party providers. So this is very complex with DORA to assess whether and in what extent a company is indeed then affected by this regulation. DORA is composed of 5 key control areas. We have ICT risk management, incident reporting, resilience testing, third-party risk management, and information sharing. And all those 5 key areas are covered by governance layer, providing a risk management framework for DORA. So DORA actually is not that new anymore. It was already came into force by the beginning of 2023. However, there was a grace period for implementation of 24 months. So DORA will finally be enforced by the beginning of 2025. So when we see now, we have end of June, at least 6 months left for implementation. However, starting now with implementation is indeed already somehow late, because when we have a look at the regulation text, it's very complex. There are also amendments to DORA. So we have the RTS and ITS, so technical standards for regulation and implementation, giving some more practical advice on how to read DORA, how to understand it, and how to implement it. So there's a lot to do. And now we somehow dive deeper into it, what DORA says, and also when it comes to open source. As I said, DORA applies on one side to financial institutes, insurance companies, payment providers, and so on, but also to the ICT third-party service providers who are supplying those financial institutes with software, with hardware, with any IT services. So we expect that financial institutes will come to the IT service providers and ask them for example contract amendments, contract changes to ensure that they comply with DORA. And on the other side, the regulator will announce some critical ICT service providers. This has not been done yet, but will be soon. And those critical service providers will be directly under the supervision of the supervisory board within the European Union. So they also may audit those ICT service providers and enforce compliance with DORA. This is quite important to know, and yeah, as I said, it's hard to assess whether you are directly or indirectly impacted by DORA. So finding the connection between DORA and open source management. When having a look at the regulation, open source is somehow a cross-cutting topic. So we have here again the chapters of DORA, as I have already pointed out. We have risk management framework, testing, and so on. And for the one side of the concrete DORA requirements, open source is not named directly, however indirectly, because when we have a look at how open source is properly managed by an open source management system, we have different key elements like open source policies, open source strategy, processes, and tooling, which are also covered in those DORA requirements. And on the other side, we have the amendments to DORA, as I said, the RTS and the ITS. And also here, open source is covered, and here open source is named directly in the regulation text, meaning that DORA asks for open source analysis, tool-based source code scans. So here it becomes more concrete and obvious that open source and the supply chain risks we have already seen are covered by this regulation. And as Marcel already said, we have a basis, we have help for implementation by the industry standards ISO 5230 and 18974, which help to provide a framework for open source management. Yeah, here we have some more examples how open source is outlined in DORA. On the left side, we have the more general text extracts, as I said, pointing to policies and strategies for open source management. And on the other side, we have an extract from the RTS from DORA from the beginning of this year, where it says, for example, track the usage of third-party libraries, including open source, or perform source code reviews, analyze vulnerabilities in the source code, and protect the integrity of source code from external service providers. So here we have, the direct mentioning of open source and the necessity to also ask the third-party service providers for help, for more information, for example, on the basis of an SBOM, to be able to do so. So here, it becomes key that the financial institute on one side and the ICT service provider on the other side really work together to achieve the compliance with DORA.
Perhaps just to mention one thing, we point this out because this is very relevant. For the last years, very often when budget cuts came in and so on, OSPOs were asked, okay, why does this need to be done, and is this really relevant, and is this, where's the proof, where's an act, where's whatever regulations that ask us to do this, yeah? And here finally, and very detailed, we have a law, we have a regulation which says this needs to be done, stuff that we wanted to do the last 5 or 10 years already. Here it says it needs to be done, and that's why we highlight these particular sentences and so on, which you can read for yourself later on. But I mean, that's perhaps very helpful in the organization as well to establish or to further work on open source program offices and programs. Yeah.
Yep. Maybe one further question for the audience. Has anyone already assessed somehow the degree of DORA compliance in the organization, like a gap assessment also? Yes? Okay, that's interesting.
But not so many.
Not that many, and as I said, the time remaining is pretty short. And what we have noticed, especially in Germany, that the regulator on national basis is already looking in pretty detail at how open source is managed within the organization. So they ask concrete questions which go beyond what is written here on how open source is managed in the organization. So although open source is a pretty small topic here in this text, for the regulator it's pretty obvious that open source is a very key part of DORA compliance. So for you, maybe later on also, we have provided some questions which can be considered and which can be also asked within your organization to achieve or to get a first feeling on how mature your open source management is when it comes to DORA. So as I already said, DORA enforces to track the usage of third-party libraries. So maybe you can check for yourself, for your organization, whether those topics are covered on the one side regarding the internal use of open source, but also on the other side when it comes to your service providers, in case you're a financial institute, how you're already managing those providers and whether there are any adjustments necessary when it comes to contracts or information which are requested from the providers. Also a good first step here is to check whether providers are, for example, certified by the ISO norms, because then it's a very good first impression that the management of open source is functioning pretty well. So lastly, implementation advice. I think not that much time remaining. Does anyone know Open Chain project from Linux Foundation? Yeah, it's not surprising. There are two standards for open source management developed by Open Chain. On the one side, as Marcel said, 5230 for open source license compliance, and on the other side, the sister standard for open source security management, ISO 18974. Which transfers the compliance standard to the security practice. And from our perspective, the ISO for security management is a pretty good first step, a first basis to address the requirements of DORA, because the adherence to this ISO standard provides a basis when it comes to policies, processes, and the framework for managing open source. And what is quite good here is that the ISO describes the what and why of open source security management, but leaves it open how it is implemented. So the ISO is very good, applicable for all kinds of organizations, not depending on the industry or the size of the company. So here we have a whole overview of the ISO 18974. I will not read it all out. You can have a look at it afterwards. But the ISO itself is pretty good understandable. I think it's around 20 pages, the ISO standard. 10? Oh, sorry. 10. Together they are 20 pages. And it's very good to understand, because it describes the program foundation, what has to be done, policy, competencies, and so on. And it's very, when it comes to certifying, what we also do, of course, it's a lot of text material to be produced. However, this is also complementing to the DORA conformance, because the regulator wants to see what is written down. Most organizations have already processes in place, processes running, understandable. However, the documentation is missing. And this is also where the high efforts come to document everything what is already maybe in operation.
And perhaps one more sentence on this one.
Yeah.
So the link between DORA and the ISO standard is that in the end, it's very critical to have an SBOM. And here in the ISO standard, it's described how you can get to an SBOM, and that's the main element of the ISO standard, to have an SBOM on this basis to manage security.
Yeah, so the SBOM is the key for the supply chain transparency and lastly the supply chain security. Without an SBOM, the financial institute on the one side cannot achieve full transparency along the supply chain, and on the other side, the ICT service provider cannot provide the contractual relevant transparency to their client. So, as Marcel said, the SBOM is key in this ISO norm, also in the ISO for open source compliance. There they come both together. The SBOM is the binding element, and is from our perspective key for the supply chain security. So to come to an end and hopefully to some questions from your side, we have now the key elements to take away for you. As Marcel said, supply chain security is an important topic, will become even more severe in the future as the methods adjust, and also the quantity of supply chain attacks will increase. We have increasing attention from regulators' perspective. DORA is the first very concrete act to enforce more cyber resilience within the financial sector. And supply chain security is a joint effort. As I said, financial institutes need to work together with the ICT service providers to ensure the compliance. And lastly, supply chain security is also a contribution back to the open source ecosystem, which we should aim for. So that was the wrap up. I hope there are some questions left. I'm happy to jump into a discussion. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that DORA requires or will result with an SBOM that will be produced. Which type of SBOM?
The regulator leaves that open. As
one source SBOM, compilation SBOM?
We don't know from regulator perspective. It's quite similar to the CRA. In the CRA, it's some more concrete, but still not concrete when it says first level dependencies, I think. But in DORA, it's not mentioned at all.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm sorry.
Hi, Perry from Most Banking Group. So I was interested in the slide where it mentions that the Act is applicable to financial service entities within the EU, but also outside of the EU. How does that relate to, public cloud service providers, for example, who provide open source tooling providers that provide services to regulated banks, who would then provision services to their public cloud infrastructure that are based within the EU, but the banking entity itself may be in the UK, or that may have a Frankfurt office, for example. How do you differentiate between the financial services that are provided within the EU, but also outside of the EU? What's the relevance?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant when it comes to it's very hard to assess whether you are affected or not, because this somehow depends on the financial institute and whether the contribution of this open source provider, for instance, is critical for the service operation of the financial institute. So it might be the case that the service provider itself does not know whether its contribution is essential or not. So this will be the information the financial institute has to give, how this software or cloud service or whatsoever is used in their final product. Yeah. Yes?
Do you think that will work? Will we upgrade all to be more stable and financial sector still running in many cases of attacks? We will obviously look at this. Will it work?
I'm not sure. It depends. I hope it works, but I think it's a quite essential first step, because we have to do something since the number of security incidents is increasing, and I think, as it is often the case with this type of regulation, in the first step we have also seen it with the CRA. It's controversial. It doesn't cover all questions which may arise, for instance, regarding the SBOM. So parts of it are still unclear. We can't answer them. But I think time will show it. Also, when it comes to enforcement by national regulators, for instance, in Germany, it's the BaFin, who will check for DORA compliance, and then we will see also with regards to their questions, their assessment, whether DORA will contribute to more cyber resilience in the end. Okay. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.